We welcome you back to Fresh Outlook. George Zimmerman, his name and his trial have divided the country, even though the jury of 6 women found him not guilty. The Justice Department says it has an open investigation into the shooting, but many are calling for a more aggressive probe into whether George Zimmerman violated Trayvon Martin's civil rights.
For the first time since George Zimmerman was acquitted of murdering their son, Trayvon Martin's parents gave TV interviews to talk about the verdict. Neither were in the Seminole County courtroom when the verdict was read.
I was stunned. Absolutely. I couldn't believe it.
Trayvon's father said he wanted America to know the kind person his son had been.
I want American to know that Trayvon was a fun-loving child. He was our child. We miss him dearly.
When Trayvon Martin was first shot, I said that this could have been my son. Another way of saying that is Trayvon Martin could have been me. There are very few African-American men in this country who haven't had the experience of being followed when they were shopping in a department store. That includes me. There are very few African-American men who haven't had the experience of walking across the street and hearing the locks click on the doors of cars. That happens to me, at least before I was a senator. In a case such as this, reasonable doubt was relevant, and they rendered a verdict. And once the jury's spoken, that's how our system works.
We continue our discussions now with Dr. Bart Rossi and Professors Donald Tibbs and John Paitakes. Welcome back, gentlemen. Some strong words from President Obama. Dr. Rossi, I'm going to start with you and talk to me about the psychology of his words, the choice of his words, and even his demeanor. I mean,
I say leadership because I think he needed to say something. I think he said it very well. I think he needed to address race at this point in time. And there's going to be folks who are not going to like that because he brought it up, but he needed to. To stay on the sidelines would not be a leader, would not be effective. And I applaud the president for saying it in the way he said it. His demeanor, I thought, was classy, and I thought he presented the case in a believable, reasonable manner. And that's what a president should do.
Professor Tibbs, the same question to you. And just when he said, you know, that could have been me 35 years ago. I mean, you know, it was a little heartbreaking even to hear him say that. But, you know, talk to me about do you feel the same way as what the president said?
Well, that could have been me 30 years ago, right? Absolutely. And I think that this is an important moment that the president has to not only portray that he is the President of the United States, but that he's also a person. And in the context of who he is as a person, he is an African-American male. And so he knows what it means to be profiled. He knows what it means to be followed around stores. He knows what it means to have doors locked on him, to have purses clutched in his presence. I think pretty much any African-American male in this country has had that experience at one time in their life. These are the things that we call microaggressions. And we think about violence in the context of physical violence, but there's also such a thing as emotional violence. And to experience those microaggressions, those little small acts, those little things that help remind you that perhaps you're seen different, you're somehow not the same, you somehow don't belong, you don't belong in this neighborhood, you shouldn't have enough money to be able to shop in this store or drive that kind of car. Those types of microaggressions impact us and they hurt us over a long period of time. That's why the president said African Americans are looking at this through the lens of history, not just through that history that connects race to criminality, not through just this in-the-moment experience.
And I can't imagine just that feeling. I've experienced prejudice myself, but I can't imagine how that wouldn't make you very angry to have somebody just follow you around. I mean, is that something that most African Americans feel?
Yes, absolutely so. I mean, I've had personal experiences, really too many to recount on the television show. We would run out of time. But, you know, for instance, one story I remember even in my own life was I had just made a purchase of a watch at a big store. I won't say their name on television, but I just made a purchase of a watch, walked away from the counter. By the time I got to the door, security walked over to me and asked me if they could look inside my bag. They somehow had believed that I had stolen this watch. And so that experience and that feeling that you don't deserve, you can't have, you shouldn't belong somehow, some way. You know, when you have that experience one time, you live through it. When you're 40, 45, 50 years down the line, you've had it over and over again, it bears on your soul in major ways.
I'm sorry you experienced that, but thank you for sharing that story. Professor Paitakes, your thoughts about the president's speech?
You know, I agree to a certain extent with what Dr. Rossi said and then Professor Tibbs, but, you know, the other side of it is, I mean, how often does the President of the United States get involved in incidents that happen? I mean, there are crimes, unfortunately, happening in every state, and, you know, do you pick and choose or whatever? I mean, there are gangs, you know, gang killings going on, minorities of other, you know, cultures being targeted or whatever. You know, so where do you draw the line about taking a national stance like that? I mean, do you leave it up to the states? Yes, this is a big issue, but again, you know, I just have some, you know, question, reservation about the president getting involved in, you know, what's happening in particular states, particular incidents. You know, if something else happens in a different state.
He was actually criticized
Well,
for not stepping up in the past. Those on the right said that he was not part of the community. He was not part of really being a president. And now that he does stay up, they're going to criticize him for stepping up. So, you know, I stand with the president.
Yeah,
on this
well,
one.
you know, we're all entitled to our opinions, but
and that's why we're here.
You know,
but as we've seen with this trial and the George Zimmerman name, it certainly has divided people, and I do say that it's divided people even on the younger generation as well. Now, do you think that because George Zimmerman was also Hispanic, do you think that plays into it at all?
You know, I think that we're looking at this through the wrong way. We're talking about race in the wrong way here. We shouldn't be talking about whether or not this is an incident of whiteness versus blackness, Hispanic versus blackness. We should be talking about non-black versus black, right? I mean, because that's really what's occurring here. Even though George Zimmerman is Hispanic, he can still have some of the same racist beliefs, some of the same discriminatory attitudes towards African Americans, because it is the framing of African Americans as somehow criminal, as somehow not belonging, as somehow being the face of crime in the United States that everyone can walk away with. And that's really what we need to be talking about in the context of Trayvon Martin. It wasn't that it was just because he was black, it was because he is the face of crime, which flows from blackness.
I agree, because I think it's the personality of this individual, not whether he was Hispanic or not. And I think Zimmerman's personality makeup had this framed out where he was going to profile this kid.
Explain what you mean by the personality makeup. We talked about it last week, but if you could just...
Well, I think Zimmerman is the type of person who's a wannabe cop. He's a guy that has a history of being somewhat confrontational. He's had a lot of problems on campus. They wouldn't let him back on the campus. He only has one more credit to get for his AA degree. There's a reason why they don't want him back. He's got issues in terms of his personality makeup that really transcend whether he's Hispanic or not.
And yet the judge did not allow that to be brought into for the jurors to hear.
Right.
So is that one way where we do need to look at the court system, where you can bring in somebody's past? Does it, or do you just look at the incident itself? Where do you draw the line?
Well, I just wanted to mention about Zimmerman. Actually, he took an Afro-American girl to the prom when he was in high school or whatever. So, you know, the thing about the racism and the prejudice, I don't think that was a major thing.
Well, even allowing that to be brought into the...
Yeah, I mean, that was in a separate report I read. It wasn't on the news or whatever.
So I would probably disagree with that, because just because you have black friends doesn't mean that you can't hold the same type of attitudes. I mean, African American women are not going to be threatening to him in a way that African American men are, right? So when we talk about, once again, the face of crime, it's not African American women, it's African American men. It's young black African American men. And so if you look at George Zimmerman over the course of time leading up to this event, we have 46 calls to 911. The last 6 that they actually allowed into court, they all identified him looking for African American men. He constantly called the police on young black men in his neighborhood. He was looking to catch a particular type of individual that he thought perhaps was breaking in.
But again, these are the types of questions or comments. Should these be allowed and admissible in courtrooms?
I think so, because I think what happened in this case personifies the fact that the psychology and the makeup of this case was really kind of pushed aside, and the specifics, the nuts and bolts of the law were to take over. And I think that's wrong. I think that the prosecutor got it right at the end, John Guy, when he said, look into the heart of this suspect and look into the heart of Trayvon Martin. But the jurors said, well, maybe that's a nice thought, but it's not what we're here for.
You know, I asked this question last week, but I'm going to pose it again. You know, we had these TV cameras inside that courtroom.
Yeah.
You know, how did it change the whole makeup of it, and you know, in terms of the psychology of everything, and how did people change?
It changes it.
It
Yeah,
changes it a lot.
Right.
I'm going to
Yeah.
go on the
Right.
record of saying.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
tell me your thoughts first, since you're.
Well, I think that people act differently. They present themselves in a way. They know they're on TV. They know they want to make a particular point, so maybe they ingratiate themselves. They put themselves into the picture rather than just make it associated with the case itself. They become part of the process because they're on TV. It's not a good thing.
And it can also make people nervous, right? I mean, one of the things that not everyone's comfortable on the camera, and so the idea that you have to sit on the witness stand and the entire world is going to pay homage to every word that comes out of your mouth might make some witnesses a little bit more hesitant to be, not be truthful, but just to be able to talk in a forthcoming way.
Well, when is it a good time to have TV cameras in the courtroom? Is there ever a good time? Professor Paitakes, what are your thoughts?
That's pretty controversial, but you know, just to build on.
No, but what do you think about that? I'm going to hold you to that question. When is there a good time? Is there a good time?
Well, I guess, you know, in cases of national significance, you know, which this rose to, there's a lot of public outcry to see what's going on or whatever, so they want to. You just have to be able to balance this media frenzy kind of thing with them highlighting certain aspects of it or whatever, you know, to sort of get the headlines.
Well, as a reporter who's covered major cases before, sometimes you're bringing out the snippets and you're bringing out what you took away. So it becomes more of a personal, almost you're editing what happened in the courtroom. So some people say that the cameras should be. So my question for you is there ever a good time to have the cameras in the courtroom?
I don't know. You know, I'm not really sure where I sit on that. I'll be honest. There are moments in where I don't think the cameras should be in the courtroom. I mean, and obviously we don't allow cameras in all types of cases. For example, depending on the age of the defendant, or if someone that's a minor is going to take the witness stand and we don't want to put their face on television, we might not allow cameras in then. So we can make decisions about whether or not cameras should or should be in the courtroom, but to the degree that they may throw a little bit of the process off, we should be cautious.
I say
Well, we're
no.
going to come. Okay,
I
you say no.
I say no. Not a good
All right.
idea.
Gentlemen, we're out of time on this segment. Great discussion. We're going to come right back with much more on Fresh Outlook. And when we return, we'll be talking about some of the innocent men and women who are behind bars and one woman's search for the truth after her brother was found guilty of a crime he didn't commit.